We have an emergency edition this week. I don't know what we want to call it, but we had to summon the Web3 crew this week. We have Jerry, we have Matt from our Web3 growth team. We have myself, Warren, and Xander, as always, from the Upptic crew. Why are we here? Because Web3 gaming is having a moment, and it looks kind of real this time. For those that haven't been following things closely, over the last week or so, we had a game from the Web3 space called Off the Grid that has blown up and gone crazy in kind of mainstream gaming circles, and is currently #1 game on the Epic Store, not available on Steam because it has crypto stuff in it, which we'll get into. And we're seeing this covered by streamers like Ninja. We're seeing just metrics that we've never seen. So before we get into it, does someone want to do a little summary for our listeners of like what is Off the Grid?
So Off the Grid is a free-to-play third-person extraction shooter, which first got onto my radar via Matt. Thank you, Matt, for letting me know that I should play this game. It's in early access right now, just launched on the Epic Games Store, as well as PS5 and Xbox Series X. Kind of taking the internet by storm. It was peaked at #1 on Epic Free-to-Play, and it's also been streamed by some of the most popular streamers in the world, Ninja, Dr. Disrespect, many, many others, which we'll get into other. What's the dirty little secret? It's actually a Web3 game. And so we'll talk about what that means.
I've been playing a little bit, and the early access, the Battle Royale is only up to 60 players. So I think that, they're just stress testing a lot. I do have to say the specs at the moment are quite high for PC. So you need a pretty good graphics card, I think 3000 series or above that. So for example, I had a 4080 and it runs fine, but it's also on consoles. So PS5, Xbox, which is great for gamers, right? All around the world.
To add a little bit of extra things in for like some of the Web3 things that the game has is like really important thing that is going on with Off the Grid is it's very like what we call like wall abstraction. So there's a like very low friction to actually getting into the game. So it's not in what people normally think we have to go get a wallet and get money into it and how do you do all these things. That stuff is just happening upon account creation, which is I think a thesis we've all thought about for a long time is like, will this work and will people accept it? And I think we're seeing now that like, hey, maybe that thesis is true. Thanks
for that, Jerry. We're going to get a little bit into like why this is working, why this is breaking through, but maybe a little more context for people that haven't heard of Off the Grid before. The developer is Gunzilla Games. The chain that they're building on for the Web3 elements is the Avalanche chain. The lore and world building, one of the creative minds behind this was Neil Blomkamp, pretty well-known producer-director. He was behind District 9, Elysium, Chappie, and he's done a lot of this kind of like dystopian sci-fi aesthetic that really comes through in the world. So I think, high level, if you remove, let's just set all the Web3 stuff aside. This is a game that's had like the production budget and the DNA behind it and the dev team that is like on par to where I think if there was no Web3 elements, this would probably just stand on its own as like a meaningful game release, right? And maybe that's where the story starts. So maybe one thing to start the discussion, this is a Games Growth podcast. I wanted to ask you guys, like, why this game? Like, why are we seeing this break through and have a moment and kind of move the Overton window and break into regular gaming channels and regular gaming creators and discussions? What do you guys see as different about Off the Grid causing this moment?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is something that is, for those of us who are more familiar with shipping games, the Web3 space doesn't like to do this, but they don't like to go where the gamers are, right? They like to stay in their echo chamber. They like to stay in their little like walled gardens. And I think what you saw is a team actually take a meaningful attempt at going where gamers go. And like I've said this a couple times throughout the week, but they're shipping a shooting or a third-person, first-person shooter that's on PC and console the way that you're supposed to ship a shooter that's built for PC and console instead of, hey, let me just go to Twitter and try to get 100,000 impressions on a post and then I'll call this my soft launch, right? They didn't do that. They went to some streamers that have the biggest distribution channels who have, these rabid fan bases and said like, yeah, here's some money to play the game. Tell us what you think, show it to your audience, and let's see if this has legs, right? And it takes a lot of confidence to do that and a lot of like chutzpah, but they had the game to back it up. And I think you see that has resonated with some of the streamers. Yes, they took money to play this, but they've also been speaking very highly of it. So I think it's just it's a silly thing. And when you back it out to those of us who know how to, ship games a little bit more, they're shipping games the way you're supposed to ship games instead of trying to stay within the walled garden and hope that eventually those walls break down from the inside. That's just not how it works.
I'd actually love to go to you next here on some of Jerry's comments of kind of meeting gamers where they are. Like, Xander, you've been like our rightly so, like a resident crypto skeptic of just sort of like the compromises made to games building with Web3 technology. One thing that you said to me before this podcast is like, this game's just fun. Like you've been playing a fair amount of it, right? So like just from like a player standpoint, what are your thoughts on it? And like what was different from you from maybe like testing other Web3 games that you've had more negative experiences from?
And I think the predominant thing is if you had no idea this was a Web3 game, you would never know about it. And that's both because the onboarding is so seamless. They don't explain it to you in any way. They sort of like hint at it by saying, you get to ship this stuff off to the real world. But the other piece of it is just so silky smooth and easy to play. If you've played Fortnite or any of these other games, it plays like an awesome version of Fortnite with like the jetpacks and the ability to customize your character and getting all these items. That piece of it is the thing that matters the most. And one thing I'll tease now, which I think we'll get to later, is the way that they've done the extraction shooter loop with the hexes. They've done a really good job of matching the mechanisms of the blockchain and ownership to a meaningful gameplay loop. And so we'll talk about what the extraction gameplay loop is, but I think one of the really interesting things here is, one, first and foremost, excellent game, stands in its own right. Didn't launch with a token out the gate, like not trying to sell something before it exists. And then the second part is they actually went from the ground up, build a game design experience that is symbiotic with the blockchain and with Web3. I think that's what's really exciting about this. And I've gotten to the point where I've pushed my friends, and again, this is me, I'm the skeptic, who's pushed my friends to say, hey, go try Off the Grid, because it's a breakthrough Web3 game.
Got it. Yeah, Matt, would love, I know you've been researching this a lot as it's been coming out. You've been also kind of keeping us up to date with some of the metrics that you've been watching. Like, what's your take on why this is breaking through, and what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, kind of like my colleagues just said, I think the first thing that they did really well is that they actually went all in the proper channels, right? So again, sponsored Ninja, Shroud, XQC. These are some of the biggest Twitch streamers in the world, and they translate their audiences to YouTube as well. One of the things that I like to point out is that, they're still in early access, but they're not an early access kind of like it usually is in Web3, which is actually like a really, really bare bones prototype or even demo of a game. They're like a real early access game where, it's the core loop is there. They're like 95% of the way there. It's the thing that they have to nail down from all the feedback that I heard from all the creators that played is, optimization, right? The game should be able to run on machines with lower specs. I'm not sure how it runs on consoles, but I imagine it's good. So they got that part down really well. The game has been building for 5 years. So yeah, they just nailed that part. I don't think any Web3 game would do as well if they threw the same amount of money in the wall. But yeah, I think from research and a little bit of talks that I've been having, it seems like they did go big in this. I think it was, some people estimated they were spending like $2-3 million a day for the week, and they kind of sponsor a lot of these creators to do 4 or 5 streams, a number of YouTube videos as well. So yeah, they probably dropped upwards of $5-10 million for this. But, all in all, I think they definitely had some help from Avalanche, and, it reflected pretty well when it comes to token price on the blockchain. So all in all, I think they're probably saw ROI, at least on the blockchain side of things. In terms of the Twitch stats, which is what excites me like a lot, is that I really quickly noticed how many people were just streaming the game, people that were not sponsored. So on day 3, there was only 3,000 streamers streaming the game. But by day 7, there was upwards of 15,000 streamers on Twitch that had streamed the game, right? This isn't counting YouTube or other platforms. I'm sure there was some people on Kick, TikTok, etc. streaming. So overall, it's a really good sign that gamers can in fact get past NFTs and crypto. And, if a product is good enough, people will give it a chance, especially if you can just play it normally like any other game, right? So I think that's the main takeaway here.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dig into that a little bit more. I want to talk about like the growth strategy here, like what Off the Grid did, what's working, the opportunities we see. So for folks that might not know Matt and Jerry, like they're both content creators in the gaming space. And then here at Upptic, they lead, there are growth leads, and they also lead when we work with content creators and do like KOL or content creator engagements for our games. So you guys know the space very well. It sounds like what we're seeing here is that they went hard. They kind of went to the top of the food chain for content creators, but now we're kind of seeing a knock-on effect of like I guess we would consider this like the earned media with content creators. Like that's at least my perception, not being as close to it as you guys, but is my read correct? Is that what you guys are seeing? Like how much of this creator activity that we're seeing right now is earned versus paid, do you guys think?
Yeah, I think this is something that's like a new concept to the Web3. We talked about like on a space last week, paid and earned media, and a bunch of people were like, what's earned media, right? So I think this is something that's a new concept to the Web3 space. But Yeah, I think that there was a ton of money spent on the top level guys, right? The Shrouds, the Ninjas, the Tim the Tatmans, right? But, there was no money spent in Web3, which would be marginal compared to, like, as much as we make fun of Web3 rates, right? They're not Ninja rates, they're not Tim the Tatman rates. But, like, things like the Forbes article and the million website reviews that have been written. I was talking to Teddy on a space yesterday. None of that stuff was paid, right? So there's a ton of reach that came from that. And I think, like, he quoted it. I think it was somebody else who quoted it, but like this came from the AVAX team. I think it was like 800 million impressions so far across like all channels. And that is, astronomical for any game, right? But to have that for a Web3 game is huge. And I think for, that $5 to $10 million spend, they got, I think, a couple orders of magnitude beyond that. So I think, a ton of this was just earned. Right. I think the number of streamers they paid was what I heard 80. And, to quote Matt's number, 15,000 is a lot higher than 80. So, and all that stuff counts, whether those channels are small, whether they only have 50 people watching, like, what you're seeing is a really strong referral system working here. Like Xander said, he had 4 or 5 friends go play it. I've had friends hit me up and went like, whoa, dude, is the gaming sector back? Like, do I need to unlock my Coinbase wallet again? And so I think, both of those things have played like really strong factors here.
I definitely concur. One of the things that I think they definitely did right was people say they went to the biggest streamers in the world, but the main thing is they went to the biggest streamers in the world in the right niche, right? There's so many content creators in the world, but they didn't go to people that don't normally play Battle Royale games. They went to like the biggest creators that play Battle Royale games. And I think that's one thing that Web3 often gets wrong, right? In the Web3 world, no creator is properly niched down, or at least very few of them. And they just hit the nail on the head with the kind of like the talent roster that they picked, right? They did not just go to like a WoW streamer like Asmongold or something like that and get him to stream, because he wouldn't get it, right? He would probably say, yeah, it's all right. So they executed everything from start to finish really well. The other thing that I noticed, which might be, I don't know if it's like a good thing to hear or a bad thing to hear for the Web3 skeptics, is CEO. I think that he's their director of Web3 at Gunzilla Games. We were in a Twitter space, and he's in Argentina at the moment at the Avalanche Summit. He basically mentioned like, Web3 is in the background, right? We don't want to make this like a crypto thing, right, for the game. This is just like part of how we build the game. But aside from that, like, we just want people to have fun and spend in how they spend in a normal game, right? And they're definitely not trying to like shill anything or tokens or things like that, which I think, for the most part, I think that's in the future. I think that's how all companies that enter the space are going to operate. They're just going to use the tech and not really advertise it that much, right? They're just going to focus on the game for the gamers. And, if people discover the marketplaces down the line, that's great, right? But it doesn't have to be shoved down people's faces. And I think that's also a good thing, if you ask me, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And on screen now, I'm pulling up a piece of content from the YouTuber Tomographic. Our friend Finn called attention to this one, but this was the review and playthrough that really caught my attention. And it's kind of on this topic of earned media that you guys talked about, because what this content creator was saying, he's got over 800,000 subscribers on YouTube, right? And he actually said that he was approached by Gunzilla or, whatever agency they're working with to do paid content for the game. And he turned it down, right? And I think he shares a part of why he turned it down is like his general skepticism and bad experiences with Web3 games. But then when he actually tried it out, he thought it was a really great game and is just doing unpaid content for it. And I'm sure his rates are not cheap when you've got over 800,000 subscribers, but like this is, like top tier earned coverage from creators. And I don't think they would have gotten that if they hadn't kind of pushed through the noise and caused the space to pay attention to it by locking in at least a few top tier content creators like Shroud, like Ninja, like we talked about. So I think that's quite interesting. And on that same note, though, I haven't even looked at this ahead of time, but if we kind of scroll down to the comments here, we see in the comments, like, get this crypto and NFT shit out of here. Ability to earn usually means ability to lose. Seems like a way to milk morons. Hard pass. There's still like a large percentage of the audience that's just going to, before even playing it, just write it off based on having crypto elements involved in the game, right? So I think that's really interesting, but I keep coming back to this concept that we are, like, again, moving the Overton window. Even if there's a percentage of the population that's going to just dismiss it out of hand on the surface level because there is a crypto element to the game, we have people that are more thoughtful content creators in the space that kind of have the confidence to just assess it on its own merits, that are like, yeah, guys, I know there's crypto stuff, but just chill, play the game. There's something here. you'll probably actually like the game.
There was a bunch of people that said like, oh, I think I read one on there said you instantly lost me at crypto or whatever.
Yep.
That only being like half of the comments that were there is actually a lot better than it used to be, right? It used to be every single one of them, right? And so that's like in that one snapshot of like the top comments on a pretty well viewed page. If you go back to the IGN trailer that Gunzilla or Off the Grid released, it was all negative. It was all like, nope, crypto. There's been a few people who've done trailer releases through like big media outlets or have had big reviews from like larger YouTube channels. You couldn't get past the like, nope, crypto, I'm out. So the fact that it's only half is almost 100% increase in sentiment, right? Of people saying like, hey, I just appreciated the honesty. That used to just be like, hey, get this out of my face, right? Or, hey, this game actually looks good. I'm interested. Used to just be like, this looks great, but I'm never going to play it. So that is still, obviously, if you're climbing Mount Everest, we're at like base camp 1 still, right? But that's impressive to some people, I think, just getting to base camp 1, right?
Yeah, and I think if we take a sort of widen the aperture and think about sort of how game technology evolves over time and how game economic models evolve over time, there's always resistance to new economic models. And so if you recall, like when freemium came out, most mainstream gamers, myself included, were like, freemium, I don't want to pay for microtransactions. I want to just give me $60 and I'll play for 10,000 hours or whatever. And like, a lot of the games I play that way are true, but I also play a lot of free-to-play games. And there are still people today, I talk to my friends who are like, I will never spend a cent in a mobile game. And it's like, great, well, you just watch the ads. We'll monetize you that way. But I think I expect the exact same sort of trajectory to occur here on the Web3 side, which is you're going to get a lot of resistance early on. People are going to start to adapt to it. And I think much like freemium and free-to-play is an extension of games towards a new monetization mechanism, this is extending us on another vector, right? And so you're not going to replace free-to-play, you're not going to replace premium, but this is a new way to monetize games going forward. And it's exciting to see it actually breaking through after years and years of talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of want to seg here. So, we're talking about content creators, and I want to seg into the economy. And the reason that I wanted to tie those two things together is one weird place that we're still at with Web3 gaming economies is there's a lot of legal gray areas or things that either game developers feel like they can't talk about or are nervous if they can talk about. So one interesting thing about Off the Grid is there's very little public material directly from the developer that explains exactly how their Web3 economy works. Behind the scenes, we know, working with some developers on bringing their games to market, that this is sort of another open secret about working with content creators on your game, is there's things that, particularly in Web3, anything having to do with the more speculative or crypto side of things, that is a lot of risk for developers to say themselves, and this is kind of a touchy area. But content creators, technically, they're a separate party. They can say whatever they want. So there's this interesting song and dance within Web3 and Web 2.5 games of like information can be shared with the content creators can talk about that, but the game developers can't talk about the economy specifically. So this was Apex content creator who does a lot of gaming stuff on X, and they shared like a really nice summary with this really simple graphic of how the off-the-grid economy works. Okay, so this is a high-level overview of Apex summarizing how the Web3 components in the off-the-grid economy actually work. So I haven't played yet, I admit, because I am like absolute dog shit at shooters or any kind of Twitch game, so I've just been watching a lot of footage. My understanding is like when you're playing, you're finding these hexes in the game, right, guys? That they're kind of like the loot boxes, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you can find these hexes in the game, and then when you decode the hex, you're basically unlocking an NFT cosmetic, which you don't necessarily know is a NFT, but if I understand correctly, it's essentially being written to the AVAX chain and placed in your wallet at the time that you decode it. So you own this thing whether you're aware or not. Is that all correct so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then there's these things called nodes, which is essentially just call them like Web3 modules that can emit tokens. The scope of exactly what a node is probably out of scope for this podcast, but basically just if you own these nodes, you have ways to get earnings. But essentially like through the earning of these in-game items, the nodes are earning rewards if you're someone who's invested in these nodes. And the nodes will also be sharing the actual game revenue via token buyback and increasing the price of the token. This is a little in the weeds of like how the Web3 economic components work, but I wanted at least to like do a high level overview. The thing I'm really wanting to highlight here is the idea that this Web3 economy exists, but that Gunzilla can't talk about it. And so I'm just curious like to get the team's thoughts on sort of the state of Web3 games where we can have a game literally number one on the Epic Store, with the Web3 economy that, like, while it's not fully implemented, those of us on the Web3 side know exists, but the developer can't talk about it. Like, this is weird, right? Is this sustainable? Like, do we think that there's like long-term ramifications for game developers, or do we think that this is just sort of like the process has to work through, policies have to get established? What are your thoughts on sort of how the space is navigating these, like, kind of look the other way aspects of Web3 economies and gaming?
Yeah, I think this is definitely really tough. Part of why, again, there is like a lot of people don't know exactly how the nodes work. Even people that have purchased them don't know yet because, like you said, Gunzilla can't really openly talk about it or provide documentation. Also, another thing that is really, relevant to point out is that the Gunzilla ecosystem is closed off to like US investors. So if you're like a US citizen or even like a US accredited investor, it's not for you. You're not allowed to like purchase a node or purchase tokens or anything like that. So yeah, they kind of push that to like the rest of the world, right? I just don't think that's sustainable if you ask me, because, it's really weird when like a developer can't give you a straight answer or, they have to communicate through like a third party. I'm sure Apex and the graphic that you just showed, I'm sure he's really well educated on the matter, or someone kind of like presented that to him because yeah, apart from that, there is really not much out there. And I've been looking myself, so it's great to see, someone like Apex that knows a lot about on-chain games kind of, try to simplify it for the rest of us. But I know that the node can also there is some infra utility within it where there could possibly be other games involved within the ecosystem, right? So it definitely has
they have a mobile game, yeah.
Yeah, they have like a participation layer built in to where like the more people that are active, the more these nodes can like potentially earn you, right? So
yeah, so that you sort of described a little bit what we know about the Web3 side of the economics. I think the thing that I thought was most interesting is about how they folded in the Web3 component into the actual core gameplay loop. And so like, what do I mean by that? The thing that I found really interesting is that as you play through the battle royale, you're killing people with your team. They drop these hexes onto the map, and what you do is you go and you unlock these hexes. It takes a couple minutes to unlock, and then you extract them and send them back to your home base or whatever, which is basically your blockchain wallet. And what I really love about this is that they really well synergize the thing that's valuable to you in the real world with a gameplay experience that sort of captures why it's important. Right, and so it really feels super high impact when you're playing through that gameplay loop, where you're sitting down, you're having to defend this node that is, it basically broadcasts to everyone, hey, come kill you, and everyone tries to kill you and steal your shit. And so I think that is the thing that I was like, when I sat down and I saw that for the first time, I was like, oh, these guys can get it, because they're understanding when something's valuable, you make it part of the core gameplay loop to say, okay, this is the time when something's really serious, like, let's go for it. And I think that is the thing that like a lot of these Web3 games are missing. They kind of stapled it on as like an afterthought into a gameplay loop, whereas this is like from the ground up, it is core to the gameplay experience. And that was when I was like, okay, this is different. These guys actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's so validated, because last episode I was on, Xander called me out on this exact thing, and I said, what I'm really excited about, Xander, is games that have built, blockchain into the core functionality. And the one that I can like actually tell you about, Xander, I had an NDA in place for, so I couldn't talk about it on a public podcast. But this is the dream, right? And this is like, I think what you'll now start to see in the Web3 space is the games that will separate themselves going forward. I can almost promise that this is going to happen, is the games that have cemented or have built the foundational levels of the game with blockchain in mind, right? We talked about a couple of them last time, but I'm glad we have one finally that's like functional and people can see why is this attractive, and what did we all see, 2 or 3 years ago when we took this like calculated bet? It's this, right? Because it does add, like, I'm sure Xander's heart was racing in a way that it never raced before, like in playing a new game for the first time. So
I got pretty excited as a kid with a lot of games, so I don't know about that. I always agreed that this was I understood the premise of it. I was just waiting for there to be an example. And I think this is the first time like I actually see an example that is real enough to play.
Yeah. And let's be real. So like we know a lot of teams in the space. We talk to a lot of teams that are like looking to scale their game. And I think a dirty secret that is not that much of a secret about a lot of the Web3 games or Web3 gaming studios is that these are failed gaming studios that built something, did not find product market fit, and tried to shoehorn their way into Web3 as a way to, totally understandable, to keep their studio alive. And that's what a lot of like the first and even second generation of Web3 games were. is these kind of mid or just bad traditional games that could be early to market because they had a skeleton of a game and then shoehorn some Web3 stuff in it. And for exactly the things that Xander calls out, like it doesn't make sense. It's something that's forced in. It's not that quality of a game. So it feels like to me that we're finally just had enough time passed that we've had teams that like raised adequate money, built high-level teams, did proper dev timelines, and built games from scratch with the proper resourcing, leveraging these, as we call them, Lego pieces of Web3 to actually build, experiences that make the game better, rather than just trying to salvage their failing game company. So that's kind of what I see kind of all coming together here.
Okay, so we've sort of talked around this for a while. I think the thing that is interesting to sort of lean towards close on is, what does this mean for the space more broadly? Are we is this significant, or is this a flash in the pan?
The first thing we're going to see, which I am not looking forward to, is we are going to see over the next 3 months a bunch of flashy trailers for very early stage games with beautiful trailers that are going to try to raise massive amounts of money by being the next Off the Grid and be very cookie cutter in gameplay, but have like an IP attached or have like, a super sexy trailer. And it's going to be like, oh, okay, Off the Grid is the thing that makes money. And it's going to be a very one-to-one of people saying that they're going to do that plus. And there's going to be a land grab around that. That's the thing that I'm expecting near term that I'm not looking forward to.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. The first one is the first thing I noticed was that, like, inevitably people right off the bat, they're like, okay, this is like the Axie Infinity and Off the Grid comparison, which at first thought is like they're like apples to oranges, right? But what people mean is like the reach that both of these games got. Axie Infinity at one point, it did have millions of players. I think towards the end there at the peak, I think it was nearing the 10 million wallets mark. How many of those were real players? We don't know, right? I think it was Gabriel Layden that was saying that, this is what essentially Web3 gaming was always supposed to be, and he was kind of like trashing Axie a little bit. But to be honest, I just don't think the comparison is fair at all. I think they're both completely different things at completely different times of the market. So for example, for Axie Infinity, I have a lot of respect for them because they're the reason that most Web3 games have funding in the first place, right? Because they got 4 billion in volume through their ecosystem. All these other Web3 games raised at the back of that, right? I was like, oh, we're going to build the metaverse. Oh, we're going to build the next, big AAA game. And, I'm still waiting. So Gunzilla is the first studio that has really set the bar up here. And one of the first things that I noticed was, normally, when a Web3 game does something impressive in the space, there's always other games or founders that very quickly come out and say that how they're also, planning to build in that way or shape or form something too.
How many actually copycats did we see?
Yeah, exactly. How they're going to do it better. But now, people have been quiet because they know that they possibly can't deliver something of this caliber, right? This takes not only like a very well-talented team, but you need the VC backing, you need time, 5 years plus, you need the 90 million that they raised, right? So it's not easy, right? It's not easy. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
I agree with you. Like, I think it rhymes with Axie in the sense that it's like a breakthrough and a new market for Web3. But I think there's actually going to be almost no overlap in player bases between the two. Axie's innovation was creating, amongst other things, and we give a lot of credit to Axie on our show here, like they created a new market in a number of ways, both like with the actual what the game was and the value proposition of the game, but just literally with, areas of Southeast Asia and groups of people that had never gamed before and giving them a compelling reason to game. Most of the Axie players literally won't be able to play Off the Grid because this is a high-end PC game. Most of these players are playing on like very low-end devices for the Axie, but just because where the community, their core is, a lot of it's on mobile as well. This is just a very different thing, right? This is, to paraphrase Jerry, this is meeting gamers where they are as far as like your traditional core gamer versus building a new market segment. So like both of these are critical moments, but I think they're very different from each other. Jerry, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you guys like wholeheartedly. I think the comparisons are really unfair to each other. It's unfair to Off the Grid and it's unfair to Axie. But I think the moments of cultural significance like really matter here. I have things that I have some concerns and I have some things I'm really excited about, right? So my concern is, right, we've seen other shooters launch in the same way, right? This year, even. I think the finals comes to mind and XDefiant comes to mind. I pulled some like Twitch stats over, these games the last couple of days, but they had similar rollouts, right? They went to top tier streamers, said, hey, please come play our game. Everybody in the world was telling me, dude, the finals is the apex killer. The finals is going to be the game that kills us. The destructible environments are so cool. And I was like, I'm not buying it, right? And the comparisons, when you look at like Twitch stats and viewership and stream hours and all these things, are really, really similar, right? Right now, it's so early in the off-the-grid cycle, we don't know if is the game as good as we all think? Because everybody said this about XDefiant, everybody said this about the finals too, but those ended up having, on the other side of it, leaky buckets, right? So is the game good, or enough people, is it still the shiny new thing at a time where Apex is fatigued, Fortnite's kind of fatigued, and Call of Duty hasn't come out yet? Like Black Ops 6 comes out in a couple weeks, so, does this beat those things? And I think it's just too early to tell. The Web3 space loves to really jump to conclusions, whether good or bad, and the Web2 side of gaming loves to jump to conclusions when it's bad for Web3, right? So when inevitably Black Ops 6 comes out and these viewership numbers all tank, because they will, what does the dev cycle look like coming behind this? And are people going to jump to the doomsday narratives, or are people going to, as the kids say, let the Gunzilla team cook now and give them a little bit of time to actually see what this dev cycle looks like? Because I don't want to say the names of any games, but we've seen some Web3 games that are shooters do some really hyped rollouts and not understand that the dev cycle from Alpha 1 to Alpha 2 takes a long time. And it takes longer than everybody always assumes. And so my fear is that they have maybe unloaded a bunch of money, and are they ready for Alpha 2 or Alpha 3 and all these things? We don't know. I've known these guys for a couple of years. I think they've been in the space quietly for a couple of years. They make a ton of good decisions. I think that they have a hit on their hands, and I think they're going to make the right choices because they've done that at every step along the way. But if we're looking for a bear case, I think it's that, right? The bull case is that, I said this yesterday, I think this is not just like an Axie moment. I think this could be like a 5 to 10x Axie moment for like the Western markets in crypto.
These metrics off the grid seem significantly higher than on the finals, right? So it's like hours watched 2.2 million versus 160K.
Wow.
Or 115K. And that's after like a multi-month rollout. And then also like, average viewers per stream, significantly higher. Some of these other things, peak viewers, not so much. But even, this is your data, Jerry, right? I'm just reading.
Yeah.
But viewers per channel, 60 versus 6. I don't know. I have no idea, right? You could be totally right. I think it's very, very fair to flag that. It feels different. I'll tell you that. It feels different.
I think so too. I just, why I started to talk about these numbers were, I think the Web3 space is looking at this as like, oh, we've won. Like, oh, right. It's here. This is the moment. And it's like, no, this is Basecamp 1, right? And there's still a couple stages to go beyond this.
This is the start, not the end.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to, I talked about the thing that I am kind of dreading that's coming. The thing that I'm super excited about now, people could probably guess if you listen to the show, I'm excited what this means for mobile, Web3, Web 2.5, whatever you want to call it. I think that is going to be the next shoe to drop. And it's going to be, we don't know where off the grid is going ultimately, but let's take it at its base case of like what it's doing in its initial week. When we find that first game for mobile, and we've been part of some larger Web 2.5 game launches this year, like Guild of Guardians, which got over 1 million players in it. But that scale is still not big for mobile. Let's just be honest. Our biggest game, we literally acquired 60,000 players a day into, and that's like 5 years in. So this is like a scale that we haven't even tasted yet on the Web3 side. And when we get a mobile game that stands on its own, and similar to Off the Grid here, does something like truly additive to the experience rather than inserting a wall or like compromising an experience and justifying it because of Web3, that is what I am super fired up about. And, I think we have a few ideas who that might be, but that's the shoe that I'm waiting to drop. And hopefully we'll get to be a part of it here on the Upptic side. We'll see. So thank you, Jerry and Matt and Xander, for all joining today, interrupting your busy schedules. As always, this was brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we are not making podcasts 99% of the time. Most of the time, we are helping game companies scale their games. That's working with our awesome people like Jerry and Matt for content creator engagements and working on that type of marketing. We also have performance marketing, user acquisition specialists across all major channels, TikTok, Google, Facebook, you name it. And we do a lot of creative stuff. We do it front to back. And then we've built this really sweet software platform that gives us all the tools to do this bigger and better than your competition for you. So if you need an awesome team to help you scale your game, or if you have an awesome team and want a really badass set of tools, the same tools that we use, so you can get the same edge that we do for your team, reach out to us on our website. It's upptic.com. That's upptic.com.
Talk soon.